Record to the cloud here. All right. Shalom, everyone. I'm Brother Doug. I'm here with my sister River, my sister Sadie, and we are the Wakened by Yahuwah Fellowship Group in Yahuwah Almighty and Yahushua Messiah. Today we are going to be continuing our Genesis weekly Torah reading. We're at Genesis chapter 47. So let's see here. Let's see. I think this should be sharing right now. Okay. All right. So I'm going to use my word software like I always do because it's the only software I have that has the Onkelos, Targum of Onkelos for free on it practically. So, all right. So starting at Genesis 47, and Yosef came and showed Pharaoh and said, "My father and my brothers and their sheep and their oxen, all that they have are come from the land of Canaan. And behold, they are in the land of Goshen. And the extreme of his brothers, he took 5 men and made them stand before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, 'What are your employments?'" Meaning, what do you do as a job? And they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, both we and our fathers." And they said to Pharaoh, "To dwell in the land of Canaan are we come, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine prevails in the land of Canaan. And we pray you, let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen." And Pharaoh spake to Joseph, saying, "Your father and your brothers are come to you. The land of Mitzrayim is before you. In the best of it, let your father and your brothers dwell in the land of Goshen. And you know any of them to be men of ability, appoint them to be chiefs over my flocks." Wow. Interesting. So he's actually giving authority to Joseph to put them as chiefs over his sheep and cattle. That's interesting. Very interesting. And Joseph brought Jacob his father and presented him before Pharaoh, and Jacob baruch Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage," I like how he answered him there, "my pilgrimage, are 130 years. That kind of makes sense. This is probably where we get the idea in Christianity, this is not our home, or, we're strangers in a strange land. Kind of makes sense. So he's trying to say, in my decrepit body, it's been 130 years waiting for my true home to come down. Yeah, so I can kind of see why he answered him that way. My pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and I have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. And Jacob baruch Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. And Joseph made his father and his brothers dwell and gave them a possession in the land of Mitzrayim, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph sustained his father and his brothers and all the house of his father with bread according to the mouth of the family of each. So, let's see here. And there was no bread in the land, for the famine prevailed greatly, and the people of the land of Mitzrayim and the people of the land of Canaan failed before the famine. And Joseph collected all the money which was found in the land of Mitzrayim and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into the house of Pharaoh. And the money was finished from the land of Mitzrayim and from the land of Canaan. And all the Mitzray came to Joseph, saying, "Give us bread, for why should we die before you? For the money is finished." And Joseph said, "Bring your cattle, and I will give you provision, if your money is finished." And they brought their cattle to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread for their horses and for their flocks of sheep, for their herds of oxen, and for their donkeys. For all their cattle he fed them with bread for that year. And that year was completed. They came to him in the second year and said to him, we will not conceal it from our master, but the money is ended, and we have delivered up our cattle to our master. There is nothing left before our master but our bodies and our land. Why should we perish before you, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants to Pharaoh, and give us seed grain that we may live and not die, and the land may not be desolate. The reason I'm saying grain every time I see corn, if you're new to our studies, you should look up the word corn in an old dictionary. Corn is not always like what we know today as corn. Sometimes it's in the old British language, which used to be the language of our country. Corn could be any type of grain. So just to play it safe, I'm going to say grain every time I see an old translation say corn. And FYI, the unkalos is a old translation. This English translation of the Torah unkalos is from the 1800s. So most likely when it says corn, it's referring to any type of grain, just for context. And give us seed grain that we may live and not die, and the land may not be desolate. And Joseph acquired all the land of Mitzrayim for Pharaoh, for the Mitzrays sold every man his portion, because the famine prevailed over them, and the land became Pharaoh's, and the people he made him to pass from city to city, from one end of the limit of Mitzrayim to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for a portion was given by Pharaoh to the priests. Wait a minute, I think I've seen that before. So they could not buy a portion of the land of Egypt because that land belonged to the priests. What does that sound like? This is why I make the assertion maybe Pharaoh knew Yahuwah. Just saying. He's giving a portion of land to the priests, which you'll see later on in the actual Torah, like after Mount Sinai, Yahuwah says you are to give a portion of your land to the Levites. Just saying. And they ate their portion which Pharaoh gave them, therefore they sold not their land. And Joseph said to the people, behold, I have brought you this day and your land for Pharaoh. Behold, I give you seed grain that you may sow the land. And it shall be when it brings forth produce that you shall give 1 in 5 to Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be yours. So basically like 1/5 to Pharaoh, and the other 4 parts are yours. That's what he's saying. Okay. Of the grain of the field that you and the men of your house may eat, and your little ones have food. And they said, you have preserved us. May we find favor in the eyes of my master, and we will be the servants of Pharaoh. And Joseph made it a statute unto this day over the land of Egypt, that 1 of 5 should be given to Pharaoh. Only the land of the priests alone was not Pharaoh's. So that's interesting, kind of like a concept of tithing in a way. Like instead of 1/10, it's 1/4 for 1/5, of what you own. So that's kind of interesting. And Yasharal dwelt in the land of Mitzrayim, in the land of Goshen, and possessed it. And they increased and multiplied greatly. And Yaakov lived in the land of Mitzrayim 17 years. And the days of the years of the life of Yaakov were 147 years. And the days of Yasharal drew near to die, and he called his son to Joseph and said to him, if now I have found favor in your eyes, put, I beseech you, your hand under my thigh, and deal with me in tubeness and truth, nor bury me, I beseech you, in Mitzrayim, but I will sleep with my fathers, and you shall carry me from Mitzrayim, and bury me in their sepulchre. And he said, I will do according to your word. Notice how this is probably where we get like family plots, and the idea of you get buried, with your family. All of the members of your family get buried in the same place. What they call family plots. So it's kind of interesting. We kind of see the origins of some of our traditions even today of being buried next to our family members. But I will sleep with my fathers, and you shall carry me from Mitzrayim and bury me in their sepulcher. And he said, I will do according to your word. And he said, swear to me. And he swore to him. And Yasharel worshipped upon the pillow of the bed. And this is important to know. In our modern English, we think of swearing as like foul language, but actually swearing, biblically, scripturally speaking, is promising an oath or making a covenant. So, you're basically supposed to keep what you swear to someone. That's why Yahusha says, be careful. Don't swear by heaven or by earth, for, it's Yahuwah's footstool. Basically, Yahusha is saying, be careful with your oaths. Be careful with what you swear, because we're supposed to be keeping our word. So if we swear something, we better be able to keep it, or sin's going to be upon us. Okay, so, and it says, and Yasharel worshipped upon the pillow of his bed. So probably he worshipped, meaning he fell upon the pillow of his bed and praised Yahuwah. That's probably what it means there in that verse. So that was chapter 47. A lot of this was pretty self-explanatory. A lot of it was just, basically them coming to Pharaoh, the sons coming to Pharaoh, and, Pharaoh asking them what they did, Pharaoh making them chiefs over his cattle, over his sheep, all of his herds. So then we get towards the end of the chapter, and it talks about how Jacob wants to be buried. He doesn't want to be buried in Egypt. He wants to be buried with his relatives. Okay, so it's pretty much self-explanatory, but what I find interesting is the priests of Pharaoh have their own portion of land that cannot be bought, cannot be sold, which you can find, I think it's in Deuteronomy 15, that connects with the Levites later on in Yahuwah's Torah. So there's definitely a lot of things that the Pharaoh holds as laws that are very similar to Yahuwah's Torah, to the Torah of Moses. So it's kind of interesting. That's what I take away from this chapter. It's very interesting. A very righteous type of king that they had in Egypt at that time. So, and again, these people also made themselves servants when they ran out of money for the grain. I think that's important to see here, that being a servant to someone or being a slave to someone in itself is not an evil thing. And that's something that society's kind of conditioned us with, that, the word slave or servant's evil, when in actuality, certain times in the scriptures, they become slaves. Even other nations become slaves to their kings because they can't afford food. They have no way to sustain themselves, So just saying. So that's what I got anyway out of this chapter. If there's any other comments or any other things Sister Sage, Sister River would like to add before we go to chapter 48. If not, we can jump right on.
I'm good, brother. How about you, sis?
I'm doing well, and no questions.
Okay. All right, just checking. All right, then.
Well, I guess I will say something that it's funny how they had cattle and they have cows. It talked about cows.
Well, his herds. They didn't specifically say cattle, but I mean herds. It's kind of like, I kind of inferred that there would have been cattle or something like that, because usually herds is including any type of animal that would be in their herds. So that would be sheep, goats, like
Yeah.
it could be all
Oxen, right?
Yeah, anything that would be in their herds, he's putting Joseph brothers. He's saying, you know, you're the chiefs over my herds. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and then to note later in Exodus, I'm glad you brought that up, sis. Later in Exodus, it actually talks about the Mitzrayites. The reason he probably did that was in the Egyptians thought that being a shepherd is an abomination. So there would be a reason why he wouldn't want to take care of his own sheep and stuff like that. They actually considered that. They're almost like borderline vegan, these guys. The Egyptian culture is like, they don't want to handle animals. They don't, you know, they're kind of like, you know, they look at shepherds being abominations, like weird. It's a very weird culture. It's a very
Like
weird,
a lower class, or the peons handle the animals. Maybe they had a prideful
yeah,
arrogancy about them, and they were used to being served, maybe.
possibly, yeah. I think just the idea of I think they might have idolized some of the animals back then in their culture, or they might have looked at kind of like how the Hindus looked at their animals as sacred, and you know, you don't touch the animals and all that. You don't, you know, so it's kind of weird. Like there's some rules in Egypt that I think that's why Yahuwah later on in Torah says you don't keep the ordinances of Egypt, because there's some. It's not that he's saying don't do whatever they do, because there's certain things in Egypt that they would do that is not evil. Not everything they did was evil. So what he's saying is don't keep their laws. There were certain laws in Egypt that were bad, like, you know, the women wore makeup. You know, they did a lot of practices that Yahuwah did not want his people inheriting. For example, the shepherding. They would not shepherd their own flocks. They never wanted to shepherd their flocks. So there was just certain weird laws that they had. You know, I would have to look it up, but I don't even know about their sacrifices, like if their sacrifices were different where they wouldn't slaughter certain animals. I don't know. I would have to look that up historically, but it's definitely, there were some weird laws. There were some weird laws. And one of their traditions too was like cutting themselves for the dead, you know, shaving the baldness of their head for the dead, or shaving their unibrow for the dead. When you go into the Torah, you'll start seeing like these weird commands that Yahuwah is telling them not to do that most of us today would never think to do. I would never think to mar the edges of my beard for the dead. I would never think to rip a piece of my head or make a baldness circle on the top of my head with a razor for the dead. I would never think to gash my flesh for the dead, you know, and so on and so forth. So there's like certain commandments that probably historically go back to Egypt and probably before that Yahuwah was trying to get them to unlearn this stuff. And so that's probably what he actually means by don't do what they do in Egypt. It's probably more specific than we think when we read that verse. We're thinking, oh, don't do anything they did in Egypt, because by association there were certain things in Egypt that are actually in Yahuwah's commandments, like you saw before. Like he gave a portion of his land to the priests in the past chapter, so that's not evil. So not everything they did in Egypt was evil, and I want to stress that to my brothers and sisters that take that verse a little too literally. In the Torah that says don't do what they do in Egypt, because not everything they did in Egypt was sinful. So not everything a culture does is sinful. So we gotta be careful about taking that too extreme literal, because that there are certain things that are allowable according to Yahuwah's word and that are not sinful that other cultures do or did, if that makes any sense. So anyway. So Genesis chapter 48 verse 1 says, and it was after these words that it was said to Joseph, behold, your father is ill. And he took his sons with him, Manasseh and Ephraim. And actually yesterday, those that weren't with us yesterday in Genesis 46 shows Ephraim and Manasseh were the two sons that were born from a Egyptian woman, the daughter of Potiphar. And I think it was the daughter, or maybe it was the granddaughter of Potiphar. I think it was the daughter of the Prince of On, if I remember correctly. So either way, you have an Egyptian woman that married Joseph. He had children with an Egyptian woman, which Yahuwah doesn't say that was wrong. There's nowhere Yahuwah is saying that this is wrong to intermarry in a different ethnicity. That's why I say we got to be careful when we look at scriptures that talk about don't take their wives for your sons, don't give your sons for their wives. Those tribes later on in scripture, they're to utterly wipe out, and there's a bigger problem than they were just pagans. There was a way bigger problem than that, because there's other pagan nations they're told to not destroy. And it says you can even take their wives and convert them, basically. So I would assert that those nations that you're not supposed to ever physically take their wives for your sons and give your sons or take their daughters for your sons, or give your sons to their daughters, or you yourself intermarry with their women and vice versa, is that they were tampered. It's a genetic problem. It has to do with the giants.
Yeah, with the Nephilim, yeah.
So and many others have asserted, like Steve Quayle and Tom Horn have mentioned this, that there is a distinction between even all the pagan nations. Not every pagan nation was to be utterly destroyed. And they were allowed to leave some pagan nations. Now, the only thing that makes sense to me were the ones that were to be utterly wiped out, including their animals, which did nothing. The animals were completely innocent. The children were completely innocent. They're told them to wipe out certain tribes, completely commit genocide practically on certain tribes. The only thing that would make sense to me is that they were tampered. That's the only thing that would make sense to me. And so that's the only thing that would logically make sense. The other tribes, they're completely human, but they're pagan. And if you want to take their wife after spoiling them, after defeating those nations and them slaughtering their armies and taking over their land, it does give you a precept in the Torah. You allow that woman to shave her head and to give her some days to mourn. And then if she wants to, mind you, it's not by force. It says if she loves you, you may take her as a wife. So I want to keep that in context. It's not force, okay? So anyway, but that's the point I'm trying to make, is that there's a huge difference between what Joseph did, taking a Egyptian wife that most likely converted and became a Hebrew, versus taking women of tampered genetics, you could say. So anyway, so verse 1 of this chapter, and it was after these words that it was said to Joseph, behold, your father is ill, and he took his two sons with him, Manasseh and Ephraim, and it was shown to Jacob and told him, behold, your son Joseph comes to you. And Yasharal was strengthened, and he sat upon the bed, and Jacob said to Joseph, Al Shaddai revealed himself to me in Luz. Now, this is something I want to check real quick. Is this Al Shaddai thing. Let me see here. Because I've been trying to figure out why it rarely ever says Elohim Almighty in the Septuagint. And this is just something I've been looking at recently. So that's verse 3 there. Yeah. So almost every time it says Al Shaddai in the Masoretic text, it has my Elohim, my Theos. So again, that's something I want to look more into, why you can only find Al Shaddai in the Targums in the Masoretic text. And, the Targums are later than the Septuagint. That tradition maybe entered around the time of the Babylonian captivity. Who knows? The tradition of making my mighty one, my deity, my Elohim into this title of Al Shaddai, who knows? But all I know is it says, Jacob said to Joseph, Al Shaddai, which most translators and even Catholic Bible translators put in their footnotes, we don't exactly know the true meaning of this Hebrew word. They know that El-Al is mighty one. Shaddai, they've by tradition have translated as almighty, so Elohim Almighty. Now, the problem is, like they've said before, they don't know exactly what Shaddai means. So that's the problem. So again, we're trusting that's correct. So Elohim Almighty revealed himself to me in Luz in the land of Canaan and Baruch me. And he said to me, behold, I will multiply you and make you great and will set you for assembly of tribes and will give this land to your sons after you for an everlasting inheritance. Okay, so basically he's recounting the covenant that Yahuwah made with him, okay, in Uz in the land of Canaan. So for an assembly of tribes, now that really shouts out, talking about the fullness of the Gentiles, they're an assembly of tribes, and will give this land to your sons after you for an everlasting inheritance. And now your 2 sons, which were born to you in the land of Mitzrayim before my coming to you in Mitzrayim, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be as Reuben and Simeon before me. And the children whom you may beget after them, who shall be yours after the name of their brothers, they shall be called in their inheritance. And I, in my coming from Padan, Rachel died to me in the land of Canaan, in the way, while as yet there was a space of ground to come upon Ephrathah. And I buried her there by the way of Ephrathah, which is in Bethlehem. Now that's important for us following the lineage of Messiah and the Messianic prophecies. That verse right there, we should take note of, verse 7 there. Because that's talking about Bethlehem, Ephrathah. And at the end of this chapter reading, I'm going to bring up Micah chapter 5, verse 2, why that's important. Okay, so Bethlehem, Ephrathah. And make a note of that on my notebook here. Okay, verse 8. And Yasharal saw the sons of Joseph and said, who are these? And Joseph said to his father, they are my sons whom Yahuwah has given me here. And he said, bring them now near to me that I may Baruch them. But the eyes of Yasharal were heavy from age, and he could not discern. And he brought them near to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Yasharal said to Joseph, I have not expected to see your face, and behold, Yahuwah has showed me your sons also. And Joseph led them from before him and worshipped with his face on the earth. And Joseph took both of them, Ephraim in his right hand, and on the left Yasharal, and Manasseh in his left hand, on the right of Yasharal, and brought them to him. And Yasharal stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, using his hands designingly, or instructing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he Baruch Joseph and said, Yahuwah before whom, now this is important right here, who the angel of Yahuwah is. Notice how it has Yahuwah to start out. It says, Yahuwah before whom my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, did serve. Yahuwah who fed me from my coming unto this day, the angel who redeemed me from all evil. Who's that? I thought Yahusha's the angel of Yahuwah, but he's calling Yahuwah the angel of Yahuwah. I would assert to you that it's the same exact thing. Doesn't matter. They're the same person. So that's what's really going on here. The Targum is showing you that the angel of Yahuwah is Yahuwah, which means Yahusha, Messiah, is Yahuwah. So the angel who redeemed me from all evil, Baruch the use, and let my name be called upon them, and the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and as the fish of the sea may they multiply among the children of men, upon the earth. And Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, and it was evil in his eyes, and he uplifted his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head, that it might rest on the head of Manasseh. And Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Lay your hand on his head." But his father willed not, and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall be for a people, and he also shall be great. Yet his younger brother will be greater than he." So this is like a paradigm shift here, because in the Hebraic culture, the firstborn is always greater. Like most of us that, read the scriptures understand that concept. So this is why he's freaking out. This is why Yasharal is Yasharal, I think it's Yosef that's freaking out. Yeah. So he's saying, "Why, father, Manasseh is the firstborn. You should put your Barak on him." So I know he also shall be for people, and also shall be great. Yet his younger brother will be greater than he, and his son shall have dominion among the nations. Now this is key, because what does Revelation say? That the synagogue of Satan will bow down and worship before you, to know that I have loved you. So the assembly, the body of Messiah, is to come from Ephraim. Ephraim is the fullness of the Gentiles. This is why it's important to understand this concept, because this is what Paul was talking about in Romans 11. So the olive tree, which is the natural and wild branches together, is to be fulfilled completely, technically, in Ephraim, because you still have these wild branches that need to come into that natural olive tree. So that's what he means by they shall have dominion over among the nations, or among the Gentiles. And he baruched them in that day, saying, "By you shall Yasharal Barak, saying, Yahuwah set you as Ephraim and Manasseh." And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. And Yasharal said to Joseph, "Behold, I die." Oh, I love this. I love how the Targum has this. "But the word of Yahuwah will be your helper, and restore you to the land of your fathers, and will give you one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the hand of Amorah, by the hand of Amorah, by my prayer and my deprecation," or probably supplication would be more accurate. Okay, so I just want to show people here, because people might say, "Oh, what's the big deal? The word of Yahuwah, it's just his words." No. Okay, let's go to Revelations 19. I'm going to show you guys why it's important when you look at the Targums, whenever you see the word of Yahuwah as a person being mentioned. Okay, see here, I believe it's verse 13. "And he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of Yahuwah." So every time in the Targum it says the Word of Yahuwah is your helper, the Word of Yahuwah is your Savior, it's talking about Yahusha before he took on flesh. He pre-existed. Okay, so anyone that doesn't know about that, I'm just letting you know that's what the scriptures teach. Okay, and unfortunately, our Masoretic texts probably don't have the word of there. So, to erase Yahusha out of the picture and only have the Father. So, anyway, so that's the end of chapter 48. This was a beautiful prayer, a beautiful baraka that Yasharal put on Yosef. Like I said, the main difference when we look at different versions of this chapter was, instead of Al Shaddai in verse 3, you have My Elohim in the Septuagint. So again, that's something I'm looking more into, why that's the case. why the Septuagint never has Al Shaddai, where the Masoretic texts and the Targums do. So anyway, but the bigger point of this chapter is Ephraim the younger got the baraka versus the physical firstborn. So this also spiritually could implicate that it's not as important to be physically firstborn as it is to be spiritually firstborn. And to me, that's what I kind of took from this chapter. And also, Yahuwah's plan overrides what we think in our minds. So Yahuwah preordained Ephraim to be fullness of the Gentiles, to have dominion over the Gentiles. So it's a very interesting chapter, very interesting. So again, he recalls the covenant. Yasharel in his dying days recalls the covenant that Yahuwah made with him. And again, we're shown that the angel of Yahuwah, which most of us believe to be the same person as the word of Yahuwah, Yahusha, is Yahuwah himself, according to this chapter in Genesis of the Targum, Genesis 48, verse 15 to 16. So very interesting chapter, a lot of meat in this, So I'm going to give time for my sister Sadie and my sister River if they have anything to add, any comments, questions, or anything. If not, we're probably going to end today's study. I don't want to give the viewers and listeners too much at once because these two chapters had a lot of meat in them. So
I certainly will be reviewing the recording. Yeah, there is a lot in there.
yeah, agreed, definitely.
Yeah, I agree as well. I have to say that when I'm studying here, we're just studying out of the Masoretic text there, and I said, wait, there's got to be more to this. This is just summarizing the story in the King James is how I look at it. So when I always open up I have the Jonathan ones, brother, of the Targums, and wow, what an expansion to understand what they're talking about. You know what I mean? So this is a very good study. And, if you don't have these books, everything is more explanatory in the Targums is what I've seen. And they've put in important points that we don't get. And so this is a good study. Very good eye-opener, brother. Very good.
Yeah, I would recommend people get all three if you can, economically speaking, if you can. If not, I'll leave a link for all three versions that we read from the Targums that our group reads from. I will say this, be careful with the Jonathan one because he was a student under Hillel, the Rabbi Hillel, so just be careful.
Okay, so put out there the ones that are the better ones that are more because I think I got your first when you first started. Yeah, you had said to get the Jonathans, so I did, and maybe I can sell. I got a couple. I can just sell them back to Amazon.
Hold on to it because there is some important stuff in that stuff. Just kind of realize that certain things that he adds in is like commentary, like there is like rabbinical commentary, like the Og of Bashan, was back in the flood. He's one of the giants that was the remnants from the giants of the flood. That you can look certain stuff up in the Targums and figure out which is commentary and which is actual scripture, because you can go to JewishEncyclopedia.com and type in stuff and see if it's from the rabbis or not. But as far as accuracy, I would say the Targum of Onkelos, the one I was reading from today, is probably the most word-for-word Targum.
Okay.
Even in the word translation of the Onkelos, they had stuff that the King James Masoretic text did not have. Like it did not say the word of Yahuwah is your helper. It would probably say Yahuwah is your helper. So they take away the Masoretic ones to get rid of Yahusha. That's why I brought that up. They want to get rid of Yahusha. It's only the Father. There's no Son. Of course I think the Masoretic text of verse 15 to 16 would read, it would say the God that fed me. So it kind of gives a wiggle room for people that believe, that Yahusha's a lesser God than the Father. People can say, oh, well, that's talking about the Son, not the Father, because he's a lesser God. The Jehovah Witnesses translate John 1:1 as he was a God.
Right.
So the Torah eliminates that leeway. It eliminates that leeway because it says Yahuwah who fed me, the angel who delivered me. So there's no leeway to separate them. there's no leeway.
They put an end to that real quick.
Yeah, so even the Targum on Kalos, which you can get on the Word software, which that's what I'm using every day off of my computer, is the Word software for PC, which is completely free. You can get the Targum on Kalos in English for free on PC. I recommend the Tov Rose versions, whether you want to get the physical ones or...
I got the Tov Rose too.
So the Targum on Kalos, I think the Tov Rose on Kalos is not that expensive. I know that the Jerusalem Targum, which is supposed to be the oldest one, is pretty cheap, even in physical form. It's probably like $4 or $5. And so those two, I always test something. When I see in Jonathan how he expounds a little bit too much sometimes, like where he'll say like the angel of Yahuwah Metatron, and I'm like, I heard that in the Kabbalah. Yeah, that's there. There are certain little Kabbalistic things sometimes he puts in there. It's basically it's rabbinical commentary. He's putting into the verse. He's adding into the verse a lot.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what I read yesterday. We were reading from it. We got carried away. And I forgot to study. I'm sorry.
No,
but yeah, that's where we were at yesterday.
No problem.
Yeah. So I missed you guys. Sorry.
That don't know about differences. The Onkelos is the most word for word. The Targum Jerusalem is actually the oldest, and you can tell it's the oldest because it has fragments everywhere in it.
Right.
It's not even a Targum. And so the Jerusalem one is probably the earliest one. All these were found in Dead Sea Scrolls. You can look this up, in the Encyclopedia Britannica. These manuscripts were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Basically, it's the Aramaic manuscript or translation. It's kind of like how the Paleo-Hebrew scriptures of 285 BC, that time period, were translated into the Septuagint back then. It's kind of like the same thing with the Targums, except Greek. It was translated into Aramaic. And unfortunately, it was a little bit later than the Septuagint. It was like a couple hundred years after the Septuagint. It was probably like 200 years after the Septuagint, because it was during Daniel's the 70-year captivity. So again, I would have to figure out like what exact. Well, actually, no. If it was Daniel's captivity, it would be before the Septuagint, actually. So let me correct myself. Yeah, the 70-year captivity was before 285 BC. 70-year captivity was like between 600 BC. So the higher you go up on the BC, the farther you are from Yahusha's time period to get an idea of what BC means. Basically, it's all the way, it's closer back to the original creation. The higher up you go BC wise, it's closer to the creation year, the year of creation.
So then we go backwards in America. Well, we do everything backwards. We read backwards. So then when it comes to Yahusha's time, it's how does it start? AD after? Yeah.
Supposedly he was born in the year 1 BC.
Oh, okay.
The reason it's backwards is because BC, Christian term, it means before Christ. So basically the reason it's backwards like that, or we think of it backwards, is because we don't understand what BC means. BC, or maybe for us that like to use set apart terminology, BM we could call it, before Messiah. So 1 before Messiah, the year of 1 BC or BM would have been the year that he was born. 33 AD is when he would have actually died on the stake and resurrected. So into the year, and AD I think stands for Adult Dominion or some weird Roman term, but basically it's 33 years after his birth. So we are now in probably, I would say we're almost in the 10th century AD at this point. So so the further you go, when you look at the captivity period of Daniel is 500, 600 BC. So that's a lot closer to the original creation than we are now. And the farther you go up into the scriptures, if you read the scriptures chronologically, it makes sense. If you read them chronologically, it makes sense. Genesis was like 1000 BC or something, I forget, like 1500 BC or whatever. So when you got Daniel being 5 or even 600 BC, it makes sense. So you got, Daniel. So the rumor is that the Targums were written in Babylon. They were actually, the Jerusalem Targum is even called the Babylonian Targum. So it basically would have been written in the 70 years of Daniel, which would have predated the Septuagint only by like maybe 150, 200 years, not that much, really. 300 years at best. Either way, both of them are predating the Masoretic text by 1,000 years or more. And so the Septuagint was written after Daniel's time period, like basically around the Maccabean time period. So 285 BC. So it's still pretty early, both of those manuscripts. And so anyway, so that's just a little history on it. I would like to do a video with our group, or if I have to by myself, on explaining what the Septuagint is, what the Masoretic text is, and show some videos on it just to explain, what the difference is between the Masoretic text, the Septuagint, and the Targums, because those are the three main ones that people use in our brothers and sisters use. I use all three. I use all three manuscripts because we have a copy of a copy of a copy of every manuscript you can think of. It's not the original. We have no original of anything. But yeah, the Targums I really recommend if you want to show to especially Jewish people that Yahusha predated in the Old Testament, because he's everywhere. You'll see the word of Yahuwah everywhere in the Aramaic Targums, everywhere. You can't get around it, and it's a person. It's not literal words. It's a person. It's not just what we think in our modern Greco-Roman mindset. Oh, words. No, it's a person. It's an actual being. So that's another study I want to do in the future too, is a oneness study, the oneness of the Father and the Son, and how it's different from Trinity. I don't want people getting confused. There's a difference between that and Trinity. Huge difference. You're, three people versus one person. Huge difference. But that's something I want to do in the future. Thank you though for joining us, and thank you for bearing well with us. We kind of went on a minor rabbit trail, but I think it was important to explain what these Targums are, the difference between them and the Septuagint. And like I said, I want to do a video in full in the near future explaining the history of these manuscripts and what's different about them. But anyway, yeah, so I recommend get all three by Tove Rose if you can. I mean, together, I think you can get all three together for like $30 at the most, because like I said, the Jerusalem one, the physical one of the Jerusalem's like $2. The Jerusalem Targum. I think the Jonathan one's the most expensive, like $16. So that's only like $17 for two of them. And I think at most it would be $10 for the Unkalos. I can always give you guys the links in the description of the video to get them. But thank you for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day. Shalom.
Shalom, brother. Thank you for the study.